Look. Hello friends, and welcome back to my channel. My name's Kirsten and I make videos on lifestyle, motherhood, and healthy eating. I'm a first-time mom to this little nugget. His name is Elliot and he's almost 7 months old, but he has been sleeping through the night since he was about 3 months old. I know that baby sleep is something that is such a challenge. Being sleep deprived is really difficult. Before we had Elliot, we had someone recommend this book to us. It is 12 Hours Sleep by 12 Weeks Old, and this is what we used and followed to get this guy to sleep through the night, and it worked really well. So what I'm going to do in this video is go step by step through this book, condense the information down, and give you what you need to know to get your baby on a schedule and sleeping through the night. Before we get started, I have to kind of do a general disclaimer. I'm in no way saying that this is the right way to sleep train your baby, or that sleep training is even the right thing to do. I know that every baby's different, every parent has different preferences, and it's fully up to you on how you do things. So just take what you like and leave what you don't. The way that I'm going to break this down is by how old your baby is. So first weeks 1 through 6, and then 6 through 8, and then weeks 8 through 12, and that's when you're going to be doing the bulk of your sleep training. When your baby is brand new and they're between 1 and 6 weeks old, your only focus is to just go with the flow and feed your baby on demand, basically. You're going to be feeding your baby every 2.5 to 3 hours most likely, and the only thing you're focusing on this stage is just to not create bad habits. And some examples of those bad habits are always defaulting to the same way to soothe your baby every time they're upset. A good example that she uses in the book is using the vibration mode on a bouncy seat, but you don't want to put them in there every time they're crying, because that soon creates the only way that they're able to calm down and start going to sleep. So you want to use those things sparingly and just change it up. So it might be you rocking them sometimes, you might use the vibration on a bouncy seat sometimes. Another thing you want to do during this time is create a log, or just continue the log that you will likely be doing when you're in the hospital if you have your baby in the hospital. This is just logging what time they eat, how many ounces they ate, and whether it was breast milk or formula. And this is going to be your best friend during your sleep training, since you're going to be able to see patterns on how your baby's eating. The biggest tip that I can give new parents is to split up your time between mom and dad and who's taking care of him throughout the night. So this does require you to either use formula or pump and bottle feed. My opinion is that it's really worth it to pump and have some breast milk on hand so that your partner can feed your baby while you get some sleep. For us, I was more of a night owl. My husband tends to like to get up really early. So what we would do is I would be on duty, if you will, from 10 p.m. to 3 p.m. or 3 a.m. and Garrett, my husband, would sleep during that time, and then he would take over and I would sleep for a good 5 hours. Okay, now we're jumping into week 6 to 8. The author mentions that this is a notoriously fussy, difficult time for almost all babies, and I can confirm that this was true for Elliot. He was definitely more fussy than normal during this period. The main things that you want to focus on during weeks 6 to 8 is that you're now feeding your baby ideally every 3 hours and no more than every 2.5 hours. The goal here is that you're trying to eliminate little snack feedings and get closer to bigger feedings that the baby can stay fuller on for longer. Alright, now we're getting into the meat and potatoes of this video, which is weeks 8 through 12, also known as baby boot camp, as she puts it in this book. Now there are 3 requirements that your baby needs to get to before you jump into this stage, and they all 3 have to be met. One is that your baby is at least 9 pounds. The second one is that they consume at least 24 ounces of formula or breast milk within 24 hours. And the third is that they are at least 4 weeks old. The first phase of sleep training is getting your baby to eat every 4 hours within a 12-hour period. The whole method of sleep training in this book is built off of feeding schedules for your baby, so the amounts that you're feeding and how often that you're feeding them. Throughout the book, I found it very helpful that she gives you kind of reassuring mantras, if you will, and she's a big proponent of babies learning how to sleep, and that it's a learned skill and that you can't do it for them, but you're there by their side to help them through it and to help them learn and be able to self-soothe and fall asleep on their own. Now, when you're trying to get your baby to eat on a schedule, obviously there will be times when they're quite fussy, or you need to try to get them to stretch the amount of time they go until they get to their next feeding. So she has what she calls toolboxes. There's a daytime toolbox and a nighttime toolbox, and these are the methods that you turn to when you need to try to distract your baby to get him to go to a next feeding. So during the daytime, you want to do things like give a pacifier. Often that'll buy you another 15 minutes. You can put them on an activity mat or a play gym. You can put them in a bouncy seat, bounce them on your knee, sing their favorite songs, anything that you know your baby is usually entertained by. Your nighttime toolbox is all about reassuring your baby that you're right there next to them, but that you're not going to pick them up and do everything for them. So some things you can do are put your hand firmly on their tummy or pat their tummy. You can whisper things like, "It's okay, mommy and daddy are right here." You can shush your baby or use one of the baby shushers that make that sound that's quite soothing for them. You could turn on crib music or a crib toy like the aquarium ones or whatever you have. I noticed that doing these things and kind of working through steps in your mind are designed for really two things. One, to obviously keep your baby calm, but they do help you gather your thoughts and keep yourself composed. Now, a quick note, of course you can take your baby out of their crib and hold them and console them as long as you feel like that's the right thing to do, or if you know that your nighttime toolbox isn't working. This should just be the exception and not the rule. Another thing to keep in mind during this intro stage is that you want to make sure you give your baby attention and cuddles and snuggles when they're content and playing on their own, versus more often just when they're crying or fussy. I know it's really easy as soon as your baby is playing by themselves and seem content for you to get something done, like fold laundry or make a phone call you need to make or do something like that. But don't get in the habit of always leaving them to do their own thing when they're content. You want to teach them that they don't have to cry to get attention, basically. The main thing that we're trying to do here is get our baby to eat every 4 hours during the day, 4 times a day. So first off, you split your day into 2 12-hour chunks, and you want to make these times based around your family's needs. For us, we did 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., just knowing that we're up as early as 6 a.m., and then if we get him down and fed after 6 p.m. or right around there, then we've got plenty of time in the evening to hang out. Let's say our feeding time is 6 a.m. This means that we were getting up around 5:45 a.m. and Elliot would start being awake right around that time, so we'd get him up probably 10 minutes before it was time to eat, change his diaper, and then jump into the first feeding of the day at 6 a.m. You're doing 4 feedings throughout the day, all spaced from the start of the last feeding time. So let's say you feed from 6 to 6:30, you're not starting your next feeding then at 10:30, you're starting it at 10 because you started the last one at 6. If your baby is waking up and is up for a long time before it's that first feeding time, the training that comes in is you need to try to stretch their feeding time to be able to make it to their first feeding time. So let's say your baby wakes up at 7:15, but you're not supposed to feed them until 8 o'clock. What you want to try to do is use the tools in your nighttime toolbox to keep them distracted for a little bit until it's time to eat. So the way you want to do this is just try to stretch it by 10-15 minutes each morning, and you'll find that as the days go on, your baby will naturally not get hungry right away. Back to the example, if your baby wakes up at 7:15, they're not supposed to eat until 8. Then you can distract them till 7:30 the first morning. Awesome, you're now only a half hour away. And let's say the next day you can distract them a bit longer, or they wake up later. Just keep doing that, inching along as you go forward, and then eventually your baby will be totally fine eating at the first feeding time. If your baby wakes up more than 1 hour before their feeding time, then it's okay to give them about 1 or 2 ounces to hold them over until it is feeding time, but don't do more than 2 ounces because you still want them to be hungry for that first feeding. Once you get started with this, you'll find that as you go, all the feedings build on each other, and that's what really makes this work. The longer your baby waits between feedings, but not more than 4 hours of course, then the hungrier they are at their next feeding. Therefore, the fuller they get, the longer that takes to digest, and the longer they can stretch till the next feeding. And that's how the cycle goes. If they're sleeping past their morning feeding time or they're taking a long nap during the day, make sure you do wake them up so that you stick to feeding them every 4 hours. I know that this can seem quite rigid, especially if you've done no sleep training and you've just kind of gone off of baby schedules so far, but know that there is a little bit of flexibility. You just want to try to stick with your times as best as you can. So it's completely fine if you're off by 5, 10, 15 minutes from the start or end of each feeding. As long as you try to stick within those general times, and that's going to be your best chance of succeeding. Another thing I want to say that might ease some of your worries is that, remember, you're not restricting how much your baby's eating and you're not cutting down how much they're eating. You're simply limiting it to a specific time frame, but they're still getting the same amount of food within a 24-hour period. It's also okay if your baby eats more or less at any one of those feedings. And you'll see if you consult your log that they might have a pattern of being hungrier in the morning and then less hungry in the afternoon and then hungry at night, or whatever that is for your baby. Something else to keep in mind during the training phase is that you want to make sleep time sleepy time and awake time awake time. So some tips for that are to take your baby out of the nursery during the day for their feedings so that they're outside. Well, not outside, they're out in the rest of the house, maybe with the rest of the family. There's things going on, there's dogs to look at, it's much more exciting, and it signifies that it's playtime and time to be awake, versus nighttime when they're in their own nursery. Ideally, if you're okay with that, this is what she recommends in the book, and this is also what we did with Elliot. And the lights are low, it's pretty quiet, maybe there's a white noise machine, and you just create those two very separate environments. So once you've stuck with this plan for a few weeks and now your baby's eating every 4 hours and still getting at least their 24 ounces within 24 hours, it's time to move on to step 2, which is to gradually reduce each nighttime feeding until they're gone. When you're feeding your baby in the middle of the night, there's a few things you want to do or not do to make it less inviting to be awake. One is that you want to keep the room as dark as possible, no bright lights because that's going to make them much more awake. You don't want to change their diaper unless there's poop in it, otherwise it can wait until the morning. And you don't want to talk to your baby or make eye contact. It's very much, you want to kind of make it so they're sleep feeding or sleepwalking / feeding. You know what I mean? Also, it's really important to be prepared and have your milk ready to go. So if you have pumped, then have that breast milk in the warmer as soon as your baby starts to stir so that it's ready before they start getting really fussy. If you're breastfeeding, then just have something easy to access that you're wearing. If you're doing formula, it's helpful to measure out your water and to measure out your formula in 2 separate containers, and that way you can just dump and mix right there. What you're trying to do here is feed them as soon as possible so that they don't wake up further and start screaming and then it's all over and it's much harder for them to calm down and get back to sleep afterwards. Now what you will do is gradually reduce each night feeding one at a time until each one is gone. And the order that you do that is specifically with the second feeding, and then the first feeding, and then the third feeding. Let's say baby's second feeding time is 3 a.m. This is the first feeding that we're going to work on eliminating. So what we're going to do is see how much they normally eat at 3 a.m. by consulting our log. We're going to call it Monday night, they had 3 ounces. On Tuesday night, you're going to reduce it by a ½ ounce and feed them 2½ ounces. And you will do that for 3 nights in a row. That means Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday night, your baby's now having 2½ ounces. The next night, you reduce it by another ½ ounce. So I think we're on Friday now. And that means we're going to be down to 2 ounces on Friday, and then you stick with that for 3 days. And you do this and keep going until you get down to 0. Let's say, like I said, you started with the 3 ounces and now you're at 2½ and you still have 1 more day to go until you're supposed to be at 2, but they've just stopped eating at 2 because they're good to go. Awesome, you're now at 2 ounces, and then you're going to stick with that for 3 days. So you can jump ahead quicker than 3 days if that's what your baby's naturally doing on their own. The next one you're going to get rid of is the first feeding of the night, and then the third feeding of the night, and then after your hard work is put in, suddenly your baby is not waking up in the night anymore. You'll notice during this process that because you're reducing how much your baby's eating overnight, then the more they're naturally going to eat during the day, and once again, this is how they stay full throughout the night and are able to sleep all the way through it. Now with Elliot, we were doing a combination of formula and pumped breast milk. However, in the book, she does talk about how to handle this if you're breastfeeding, and she just goes off of minutes versus ounces. So let's say your baby usually nurses for about 12 minutes, then you want to reduce it by 3 minutes. So go to 9 minutes for 3 nights in a row, and then 6 minutes for 3 nights in a row, and so on. I will say though that she recommends using pumped breast milk so that you can 1, see how many ounces your baby's eating, and 2, this prevents your baby from pretty much using the boob as a pacifier and just a way to calm themselves down and go to sleep. The author does also address breast milk supply challenges and suggests that once you're trying to eliminate your nighttime feedings and you're not nursing during the nighttime, then what you should do is pump right before you go to bed, and then only wake up once if you need to, and then also pump throughout the day after each feeding. And this slowly does train your body to adjust and produce more milk during the day and less at night. So those are the 2 main steps in getting the baby to sleep through the night. 1, getting them to do the every 4-hour eating schedule during the day, and then slowly dropping down those night feedings feedings to where they slowly then don't exist anymore. There are more tips in the book to help support this whole process. One is that you want to put your baby in their crib while they're drowsy but still awake. You don't want to have them fully fall asleep in your arms and then put them in their crib, because that teaches them to only be able to fall asleep if you're holding them. The whole idea is that they slowly start teaching themselves to fall asleep. More information in this book that I found really helpful was how to handle crying, because you guys know, as a parent, as a mom, it's really hard to just hear your baby cry and not go in to rescue them immediately. But she, I think, has a really good approach that I found was to be a happy middle ground, and it's that you let your baby cry for 3 to 5 minutes. So if you hear them start to cry or fuss, pretty much set a timer, look at the clock, and try to go at least 5 minutes until you go in to try to soothe them. Of course, go in sooner if it's like full-blown freak out. And once you go in there, you're gonna try to do your nighttime toolbox and soothe them from the side of the crib, but without picking them up if at all possible. You're teaching your baby basically, I can't fix it for you, but I'm gonna be right here by your side as you learn to fix it for yourself. And once they've calmed down, you're gonna put them back down in their crib, walk out, close the door behind you. If they start crying again, it resets and you're gonna wait 5 more minutes before going in and doing the same thing. Once baby is consistently sleeping through the night for about 2 weeks, then you can move into your nap time or daytime sleep training. The first nap, that's about an hour long, should occur between the first and second feedings of the day, sometime in that window. And the second longer nap should be between the second and third feedings of the day. That's all that you typically want to do according to the book. However, I didn't have it work that way. Elliot has always taken a third nap for the most part in the afternoon, but it's quite short. It's only about 30 minutes, and we try to cut it off at least like an hour and a half before his last feeding time, that's so that he's still tired enough to go to sleep when it's bedtime. Something you want to keep in mind for nap time during the day is that while nighttime is super quiet, for daytime you don't want to eliminate all noise in the house. So there still might be dogs barking, the vacuum could be running, people could be talking. All of that is okay. Don't change that because you want your baby to learn to sleep through that for their naps. Now that we've covered a condensed version of what's in this book, I just wanted to share some of the things that we did specifically and how we applied this to Elliot and teaching him how to sleep. So going back to the schedule, I mentioned earlier we did 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. as our 12-hour feeding window. So Elliot would eat at 6 a.m., 10 a.m., 2 p.m., and 6 p.m. Up until he was about 3.5 months, that was a mixture of pumped breast milk and formula, and at that point we switched to all formula for him, and he's done just great on that. As far as sleep environment goes, we did keep him in our room with us in a little bassinet. I can link the one that I had from Amazon below, but he slept in our room probably only the first like month and a half, and then we decided to move him over into his nursery, and we had a baby monitor on so that we could hear if anything happened. We would keep our doors open and be able to hear him that way as well as through the monitor. As far as what he would wear to sleep, we would swaddle him using the Swaddle Me until he was about 2 months old, and then once we could tell that he was starting to want to roll, which was pretty early on, we transitioned away from the swaddle and put him in the Halo sleep sack over his pajamas. We also use the Hatch Baby noise machine at night and just play white noise for him. We also have had a pretty consistent bedtime routine. He gets a diaper change, we put him in his pajamas, we feed him about half of his bottle, and then after that we put on his scratch mittens because he has some eczema on his cheeks and he likes to scratch them, and that's no good, so he wears little mittens when he goes to sleep. And we also put on his face cream, and then we will feed the rest of his bottle, turn the lights down, turn on the noise machine, make sure the blinds are closed, and then he knows that it's time for bed. Another thing that we've done that sounds pretty simple but is actually somewhat difficult at times in real life is that we've really stuck to this schedule. I think it's key to do this, especially around visitors. So if there are people that want to come by and hang out and see baby, then you can try to give them a good window of time when your baby tends to not be napping. Sometimes that fails and they fall asleep randomly anyways, but we really stuck with it and wouldn't keep him awake longer than he needed to be or avoid putting him down for naps just because somebody was over at the house. We found that it really pays off, and it was so much better in the long run for him to stick to a schedule because then he's happier, less fussy, and therefore we are also happier and less fussy as parents. If you have any questions on anything I covered, of course leave those below in the comments and I will answer them for you. If you like this video, make sure to like it and subscribe if you would like to see more videos and hang out. Thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing day, and I will see you soon. Bye.